Welcome to the Irishman, Englishman and Scotsman Football Podcast. This is the Irishman, Englishman and Scotsman Football Podcast. I'm absolutely delighted to announce joining me on the show today is Fox Sports football analyst, Aston Villa, Manchester United and Australia legend, Mark Bosnich. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, JP, and thank you so much for having me on. Finally, I made it.
Yeah, it's great to speak to you and to see you though, mate. And, I'm glad you could come on. Right, Mark, we go right back to the start. You were born in Liverpool, but not that Liverpool, mate, not that Liverpool. There's a Liverpool in New South Wales in Australia. And you played there, you grew up there and you played for a team called Sydney, Croatia. Was Liverpool a big Croatian immigrant area? And what was it like growing up there?
Yeah, and it was an immigrant area. There's no doubt about that. Liverpool's to the west of Sydney, and there are a lot of Italians, Croatians, Serbians, Greeks, South Americans, Irish, Scottish, English, all that you can think of out of the west of Sydney. Now, the west of Sydney now, Western Sydney, if you like, is actually the third biggest city in the whole of Australia. So you've got Sydney's number one, then Melbourne, then the west of Sydney, and a vast majority are made up of immigrants who came, especially, you have to say, post-World War II. And you're right, I played for Marconi, which was a local Italian club, and also played for Sydney, Croatia, as they'll call it at the time. My father came to this country from 1959, from what was then Yugoslavia, what was now Croatia. My mum was born here. And the football has always had a fantastic spirit out there, and it really shines now in the local league with the Western Sydney Wanderers, with Sydney as well, Sydney FC, who are more towards the city, obviously, and north of the city and east of the city. But there's been a great footballing tradition out there. There's no doubt about that. We have a lot of sports here in Australia, and football's not the number one sport, but it's the number one participated. And I would venture to say it's probably the most supported, although not locally, but worldwide. I think you go a long way to find a more supported sport locally than worldwide football.
Now, when you were growing up, did you play other sports? Because I think back then, you know, for me, Australia wouldn't be predominantly, a soccer nation. You got Aussie rules and cricket and rugby.
Yeah.
So you played them all,
definitely. Yeah, most definitely. You have to say AFL, which is Aussie rules, rugby league and cricket are the three top sports. There's no doubt about that. And especially rugby league and cricket, I played a lot of that growing up, and other sports as well. There's no doubt about that. And I always say, a lot of people always sort of ask me about growing up and, in terms of training and so forth. I think it actually increases your athletic ability to play as many sports as you possibly can while you're younger. I think that's very, very important because, you learn all types of skills, all types of different balances and different demands. And I think it really, really does help you. So, rugby league's a very tough sport. There's no doubt about that. So, Mum wasn't too happy when I was turning around and saying, look, I'd like to continue. She's like, no, you're not. But she reminds me that she made a good decision for me, which is exactly right. Aussie rules, not so much, because there wasn't even a team in Sydney up until probably in the early 80s or something. And then cricket in the summer. Cricket was always a major, you have to say, major staple of the sporting calendar here in Australia in the summer. Obviously we have the Australian Open tennis, but that's in January only once a year. There's golf and all that, but cricket was and is the most popular game in the summer. And ironically, when I came back to the country in 2008, football, soccer had moved to the summer, which I still don't think that's the best thing in terms of the sport. So it was really, really weird that you got the cricket on the same time as the football.
Would you say that being involved in the likes of Aussie rules and rugby league benefited you as a goalkeeper? Because this is something I hear, from when I watch rugby union on, say, for example, the BBC or Sky Sports in the UK, and they say, no, this is a brilliant Irish player, but he has a Gaelic football background, and maybe that's helped, catching the ball and hand-to-eye coordination.
Well, that's another sport as well, rugby union. And funny enough, the high school I went to was a rugby union school. So I played a lot of that. And there's a lot more skills involved in rugby union than there is in rugby league, you have to say, because of all the kicking nuances. And I think especially when I, kicking the ball from the floor, I wouldn't say was my greatest strength, but kicking out of my hands was. And a lot of that was from the fact that I played those sports where you kick predominantly out of your hands. Rugby union, which is probably on a par with soccer over here in terms of its popularity, but it's another worldwide sport. Field goals are so important. You get 3 points for them, penalty goals, things like that. And rugby league, kicking out of your hands to find touch is very important. And of course, Aussie rules, it's pretty much all about that. And Aussie rules is very similar to Gaelic football. There's no doubt about that. A lot of similarities there. And like I said, I think it enhances your all-round athletic ability, and especially something like Aussie rules in terms of a goalkeeper for the high balls as well, catching the ball at its highest point in amongst a crowd where they can use their hands as well. Definitely gave me an advantage than when I was playing football and I had to come out and the other players could only use their head and I could use my hands.
So when you started off, were you straight in goal or did you try playing outfield? Your dad obviously was an influence, on football.
Yeah,
because he was Croatian,
Dad was definitely, and he always tells the story how, like, I started off up front because I wasn't good enough. I just went all the way back into goal. So,
oh, brilliant!
So I kind of like the individuality. I did start off up front, and I played outfield, but I really did like the individuality of the goalkeeping situation. It was more the fact that I knew if you did your job right, that basically, you were okay. You could actually help others. Whereas sometimes on the outfield, if people, I don't know, maybe not don't like you, but they don't fancy you for whatever way, if they don't pass you the ball, you've got an issue. And as a greater striker as you can be, you can only be that great striker with great service. So I think it was a mixture of that, a little bit of what my dad said, as much as I don't want to admit it. And also like I said, the fact that I played so many hand sports as a kid, that I found it very, very natural.
Good stuff. You went over to England age 17 to Manchester
16.
United, or 16 to Manchester United. And actually played a few games for them before heading back to Australia. Was there an issue with a visa or what happened there?
Correct. Yeah, I couldn't get a working visa. So I actually went over first to Liverpool when I was actually 15, and I was going to sign there. And they actually said straight away, that was in September 1987, Kenny Dalglish was manager, that there would be an issue with the work permit because I hadn't played a requisite amount of internationals. Obviously, they weren't going to put me on a wage that was comparable, to the top first team players, which is understandable at 16. But they thought that they could get it. Sir Alex Ferguson then got me over in March 88 and basically locked me in a room and said, "Look, you're signing here with us." And he said, "We're going to definitely get that work permit." But it proved elusive. But it was a wonderful learning experience. Those 3 years from 88 to 91. Like I said, I played 3 games. I made my debut at 18, which was absolutely fantastic. But playing more importantly, playing in the reserves midweek in the Central League, playing in the A team on a Saturday morning, the B team, playing in friendlies or testimonial games, traveling to Isle of Wight, Isle of Man, to Ireland, all these places, playing against men really did toughen you up and gave you the type of experiences that you're hard to find anywhere else in the world. And so far as I was concerned as well, the fact you could do it under the radar at that stage was even a bigger advantage because you could make those type of mistakes that you normally do in your younger career without the full glare of publicity on you. So for me, that was a vital part, those 3 years that I had, even though in the end it didn't work out because I couldn't get the work permit. No pun intended.
Before we go on to Villa, when that didn't work out with Man United and the visa, did it ever, occur to you that the dream has died of playing in England?
No, not really. No, not really. No, I was actually talking about this the other day, funny enough, JP. At the time, I always remember because Peter Schmeichel was coming to Manchester United, and Sir Alex basically turned around and said, well, he was Alex then, the boss turned around and said, "Look, listen, why don't you go to Brøndby for another 2 years? You'll get European experience. You're playing at the top team in Denmark, and by that time, there'll be no problem for a work permit." So I actually went over there, and they had a wonderful side. You have to say they had pretty much the nucleus of that Danish side that won the Euros in 1992. Like John Jensen and people like this, and Morten Olsen was their coach. And I went there. We went on a preseason trip to Switzerland, fantastic, and this, that, and the other. And I was going to sign, but I just said to Mr. Olsen, and I said to Sir Alex, "Look, listen, I gave up so much to come over, sort of, to Manchester. I think it's just better I just regroup at home." And then sort of, like for 5 or 6 months and then see what my options were. So they went, fair enough. They understood that.
Sounds like you had a head on your shoulders, even, back then at that young age.
Well, kind of.
you were back in England in 1992 and signed for Aston Villa.
Yes.
You broke into the team in 94 and saved 3 penalties in the League Cup semi-final against Tranmere and beat Manchester United in the final of all teams. That must have been pretty sweet.
It was, no doubt about that. I mean, Ron Atkinson, I'll never, forget the opportunity that he gave me. I mean, a fantastic manager he was as well. And at that time, Andy Gray was his assistant, but then with all his TV work, he actually left and Jim Barron took over. Ironically, who was the goalkeeper coach. And I'd actually broke into the team at the end of the inaugural season of the Premier League, so for the last 18 games or so in 1992-93, so in 1993. And then the following season, I had an issue with the national team who then banned me because the opening game of the season was on the same day that they were playing Canada. There wasn't international breaks back then. But then Nigel Spink got injured during that season, funny enough, in that League Cup against our local rivals, Birmingham. And I came on, and I remember coming on and saved a penalty. And you know how much luck is always about penalties. But then that year, I just went on an absolute roll. For every side I dived to, the ball kind of just hit me. So I saved something like, I don't know, 8 or 9 penalties that season. And the big thing was that League Cup. There's no doubt about that. And we played Tranmere Rovers with John Aldrich, who was on fire for them. They were in the the championship, I think it was called Division. And first night at Prenton Park, we sort of big favourites and this, that, and the other. They hammered us. They absolutely hammered us. And ironically, they were winning 3-0. And the late Dalian Atkinson scored a last-minute goal for us, which I thought, you know what, this may be a sign that actually we're still in this. Anyway, second leg comes at Villa Park. We scored 2 goals within about, 10, 15 minutes, and we're flying, really. And then John Aldridge wins a penalty. He goes one-on-one with me, pushes around me, runs into me, gets a penalty, tucks it away. He was great at penalties, as we know. And then we scored, the last minute to make it 3-1. Extra time, and then extra time sort of went. And again, the late Dalian Atkinson went on this mega run and he didn't score. But I thought, well, that's another sign. This is a really big opportunity here. And it was funny because during the penalty shootout, another ex-teammate of mine, another Irishman play a quite prominent part in my career. Liam O'Brien, who I was with when I was a young kid at Manchester United, and he was there as well. As he was there more as a little bit elder, like a reserve team player.
Liam O'Brien was ex-Newcastle.
That's yes, I think. I think.
Yeah,
that's
I actually know his
I,
daughter. She's from Kildare.
Yeah,
yep.
Yeah. He had a penalty to win it. If he put it away, they won it. And I'd always remember the side that he used to love going to at Manchester United. And I saved it. And then I went to sudden death and again I saved it again. So that was a wonderful experience. And like you said, we stopped Manchester United winning the treble. They won the FA Cup and the Premier League that year. We won the League Cup, which was a fantastic experience. And for someone so young like me, 22, I was absolutely wrapped.
On the same season, I think you also saved 2 penalties in a match against Tottenham. Now, your philosophy for being a goalkeeper facing a penalty kick, is it instinct, or do you automatically pick a side before the kick is taken?
There's a lot of things. Yeah, there's a lot of things that come down to it. But like I said at the start of this, when I was talking about, you got to have a lot of luck. There's no doubt about that. You got to have a lot of luck because all these things I'm going to tell you now, they can all fall into place. But then the striker can, or whoever's taking the penalty, can come up to the ball and miss kick it and it can still go in. So the most important thing, first and foremost, in my opinion, is to not make your mind up beforehand. And you've got to slow the player down, just like one of those long lens cameras. You know, when you put your finger on one of those long lens cameras and it goes,
yeah.
So for me, that's the most important thing. And then the second most important thing is the direction of the non-kicking foot and its distance away from the ball. Generally, the non-kicking foot will give you an idea which side the man is going to go to. And that can be decided as well from the distance away from the ball. If it's a right footer and he's approaching the ball and the left foot is quite a distance away from the ball and he's leaning, generally they go to the goalkeeper's right. If it's very close to the ball and he's straight up, generally they go to your left. And the last thing is to hold yourself to that last minute because there's a lot of penalty takers who wait and watch you. Dwight York used to do it because he used to practice it so much. He'd wait and basically he'd be looking like I'm looking at you. He wouldn't be looking at the ball. And if he saw you go one way, his reflexes were that good, he put it the other way. And that's become even harder with how they're enforcing the new rules that at least one foot has got to be on the line. But I can understand that because you had some goalkeepers who were basically coming, ahead of their 6-yard box before it was even taken. So really those 3 things, I could break them all down and bore you to death with them. But they are the 3 most important things. And like I said, that season, I just had a phenomenal run. And like I said, you've got to have a lot of luck too. That first one against Birmingham, it was John Frayne who took it. And I sort of overdived, but I hit my legs. So, if it went a little bit higher, a little bit lower, it would have hit my legs and went in, but it went medium, hit my legs, and it went flying. So, and there's always the rebound as well. You got to hope that the rebound doesn't get put in as well. But that was really good. I really like to win your first medal, to play a major part. That was really fantastic.
It sounds like that there is a whole science behind it. I mean, I played at a very low level for a team called Timahoe Celtic, and I used to take the penalties, but I would always look to the goalkeeper's left, and then with the inside of my right foot, bang it into the other corner. So I always try and do them with the eyes, but I wasn't aware that the standing foot was a bit of a giveaway. But I think my days of taking penalties are over, Mark. Okay, so Ron Atkinson was replaced by Brian Little, who cleared out most of the squad, but retained you. And in 1996, you won the League Cup final again, beating Leeds at Wembley, and finished 4th in the Premier League. What a season that was. Tell me about that.
Fantastic season. It was very disappointing for someone like myself, who was so close with Ron and gave me opportunity when he went. And my head was a little bit all over the place, to be honest, for a while. But Brian Little was a good man and a very good manager as well. He brought in Alan Evans and John Gregory with him. And ironically, John Gregory ended up taking over him a couple of years later. And he cleared out quite a few of the squad, but he retained what he thought that was important to him. Really elevated the likes of, say, Dwight York and Hugo Ekiog to first team status. Brought in a lot of signings: Gary Charles, Alan Wright, Andy Townsend was still there.
Was Milosevic there then?
Yeah, Savo Milosevic. Yeah, I was about to say that, he was signed for Partizan Belgrade for the club record fee at that time of £3.5 million. And Mark Draper had come in the season before, Ian Taylor as well, and Paul McGrath, of course, who we'll start talking about in a little bit as well. He stayed. Steve Staunton as well. Gareth Southgate had come in, and it really was an exceptional team. Tommy Johnson, the sort of the list goes on. And young team, probably didn't realise how good we actually were. And it was ironic, and we'll come back to that. But when I went to Manchester United one night after we won the World Club Championship in Tokyo, and we're having a little sort of talk around with the team and all that, and Ryan Giggs actually said to Yorkie and I, "Why didn't that team win the title?" And we were like, we didn't know what to answer. He said, "Well, they were good enough to." I don't think like I said, as a team, we actually realised what a good team we were. And that season, really from the outset, we beat Man United on the opening day 3-1. Like you mentioned, we won the League Cup. 4th in the league, which would have guaranteed us these days European Champions League football. And the FA Cup, we lost to a real bogey team of ours during that time, which was Liverpool. But you look back and you think, wow, that was an absolutely fantastic season.
How good was Paul McGrath?
As good a player as I played with. Absolutely. I mean, they used to refer to him as God, and I wouldn't dispute that. And a phenomenal athlete, but as good a centre-back that I've ever played with anywhere. And let's not forget, I've played with the likes of Marcel Desailly, William Gallas, John Terry, Jaap Stam, Henning Berg, even back to Steve Bruce, Gary Pallister, so some absolutely outstanding centre-backs in my time. And for me, he was the best, no disrespect to anyone else. And like I said, his athletic ability, and the way he judged the high ball, which is often overlooked, his pace, which is often overlooked, his ability on the ball. One of the great skills that you don't find as much these days is that little, I call it the late Bobby Moore, his ball, the Bobby Moore ball, when they just clip it in to the striker so they can bring it on their chest or whatever. He was fantastic at that, and to boot with that, he was a fantastic man, a real colossus, a real influence, quiet, but so powerful. He's the type of person that could sit in a room, he wouldn't say a word, but you could feel him. You could really feel him. He had a superb energy about him. I couldn't speak more highly of him than that.
Yeah, I mean, he's God to us in Ireland as well, and the stories about him having, not only train one day a week because of his knee, but then play out of his skin on the weekend. Is that true?
Yeah, that is true. I would say he wouldn't just train one day a week, but Jim Walker, who was our physiotherapist, who'd done a marvellous job with him. He extended his career, I would say, about at least 4 or 5 years. I had a system with him. He would be in the gym, and he'd be working in the gym and so forth. But a lot of times he'd only come out 1 or 2 days a week on the actual park, and it proved a lot to me that you can actually do that if you have to. But I think a lot of it was down to the athletic ability that Paul had. But yeah, he would come out, like I said, Thursday or Friday, The rest of the time, he wouldn't just do nothing. He'd be working in the gym. There's no doubt about that. But his knees needed protecting. But it was worth it because he was an absolutely fantastic player. Like I said, an exceptional player. And I always remember one story that Andy Townsend and Ray Houghton used to tell us. Ray Houghton was there originally and with Ron Atkinson. He was another fantastic player and a great person to listen to. That in 1988 at the Euros, when they played against Holland, in that amazing game where all they needed was a point to go through to the semi-finals, and then Holland scored in the last couple of minutes. That at the end of the game, Frank Rijkaard and Ruud Gullit were waiting outside the dressing room to change their jerseys, and apparently like the Irish players were like, do you want to change them? He said, no, we're waiting for Paul McGrath. So there you go. I think that tells the story. I think that tells the story in itself. Yeah.
Brilliant, man. That's absolutely fantastic. Yeah, that's that game goes down in Irish history. The game against England, but the Dutch game, I think it was Wim Keith got the goal.
That Irish game, and that was so close. But listen, they in the end, nobody expected them to do what they do, and they'd won their cup by beating England originally, but
100%,
only a couple. And in the end, they got knocked out by the team who won it. So no shame in that.
Yeah, it's all about getting there for us. I've been to, obviously 88, I was too young, and 02 as well, but I've been to the Euros in 2012 and 2016, and they're a party like no other if you're an Irish fan. Right, in 1999, you signed for the treble-winning all-star team of Manchester United for a second time. You replaced Peter Schmeichel and played most of the games that season, saving a penalty in the World Club Championship. You won the Premier League. You won the World Club Championship. That's the elite of club football. It must have felt amazing to be a champion at Manchester United all those years after your first arrival in England and the rejection because of the visa to be like Premier League champion, World Club champion. Wow.
Well, JP, that was the reason I went back. I was pretty much set to go to Italy. I was either going to go to Roma and then later on to Juventus. I'd spoken to Liverpool as well. But my heart was set on because I felt as though I had unfinished business. I felt as though that because of something that was out of my hands, that I wanted to go back and to win something. So that was the only thing on my mind. And the late Eric Harrison, who was my youth team coach at Manchester United, used to always turn around and say, everything else in life will sort itself out as long as you win on that football pitch. And to win the Premier League by a record total, which was only broken, I think, 2 seasons ago by Manchester City by 18 points, as still the second highest total of all time, was fantastic. Winning the World Club Championship was even better because that was something that we watched a lot here in Australia growing up because it was a great time for us. It was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was known then as the Intercontinental Club. Now, since then, FIFA have renamed it. And of course, now since then as well, there's a whole lot more teams that are involved. And we played in that inaugural tournament in Brazil that you mentioned about saving the that was like kind of the beginnings of it. Probably disappointment was being injured for the Champions League quarterfinal, second leg, because the first leg had done so well against Real Madrid and we got a decent result in 0-0, but then being injured and we got knocked out, that was the biggest disappointment. But to win the league, like I said, at the place that I first went to, and knowing how much it meant to those people, because when I first went there, it had been so long since they won the league, and to become the first British team to win the World Club Championship, the Intercontinental Club against Palmeiras, was fantastic memories. And that's something that basically, that's what you dream of as a kid. So when you get there, it's kind of like, okay, this is brilliant. And of course you're a bit nervous, but you thought about it pretty much every day since the day that you wanted to be a top footballer.
Yeah, I spoke to Terry Phelan recently, the Ireland left back who actually played for Chelsea also, and Wimbledon won the FA Cup. But he was talking about being at the World Cup in '94, and playing against Italy, kind of stopped in silence to himself and trying to savor the moment. That this is what you kind of dreamed of, So I imagine yours was something quite similar. The next season, Alex Ferguson signed Fabien Barthez, who had won the World Cup of France a couple of seasons before. Celtic really wanted you, but you decided to stay.
I did. I thought it was too cold in Glasgow coming from
Or you couldn't understand the accent, huh?
Yeah, look, obviously, like I said, we're going into great detail. Sir Alex and I, unfortunately, had a bit of a falling out. And like my dad used to always say, rule number 1, the boss is always right. And rule number 2, if he's wrong, see rule number 1. But when you're a little bit more young and headstrong, as we all know, that you think you're a little bit bulletproof. So maybe with hindsight, I should have maybe cut my cloth accordingly. So he went to sign Fabien. And at that time, I was like, oh, whatever, But and I went to meet Martin O'Neill. We met in London. with my then agent at the time, Steve Cutner. It was a wonderful man. He was a wonderful man as well, a really, really switched on man, a smart man as well. And I remember seeing Neil Lennon as well at a club not so long afterwards, and he was saying the same thing, Bos, why didn't you come and all that? And the answer really at that time is I didn't think my head was in the right space. I was a little bit disappointed what had occurred. And I wanted to do myself justice, and I wanted to do, more importantly, Celtic justice. And I didn't think that my head was in the right place at the right time. It's funny because years earlier, when I was at Aston Villa, and when Ron Atkinson had got sacked, and my head wasn't in the right place then, and I think Brian Little was in two minds whether or not to keep me. Rangers had come in for me then as well, and I told them the same thing. Like I said, number one, it's too cold. I said, number two, my head's not in the right space, and I don't want to. I wouldn't never want to go to a place, because Archie Knotts, he used to be assistant manager to Sir Alex at Manchester United when I was there as a young kid. He was there with Walter Smith at the time. And I wouldn't be able to look myself in the mirror if I'd let themselves down by not being brutally honest. And the same with Martin O'Neill, when I saw what a nice man he was and so much respected him. He told some great stories, especially about the late Brian Clough and so forth. I just said to myself, and I said to my agent, I said, I can't, because my head's not in the right place. And I wouldn't want to let somebody, such a high caliber person down, simple as that.
Fair play to you, Mark. That was just a very honest assessment, You weren't just going to go there and grab the money, even though, but
exactly.
you knew yourself
Why?
that you weren't in the right place. No, I respect that a lot. I do. Alex Ferguson, what was he like to play for, and what kind of relationship did you have with him?
Yeah, it was a lot different. From a young kid, it was far more simpler, because as a young kid, it was just basically, just yes sir, no sir, yes boss, no boss, You kept your mouth quiet and you sort of stayed in the background and so forth. A lot different than when I came back. Obviously, when I came back, it was, it was on a lot of money. There's no doubt. I came on a free transfer, and the expectations of the club were, I would say, a little bit different. The club had changed. They had that success that they always were yearning for, and he changed, and I changed as well. Maybe looking back, I didn't quite realize that. Maybe he didn't quite realize that, because maybe he viewed me as that young boy from Australia who would just go, okay, no worries, where I wasn't. It wasn't, the Mark Bosnich then, when I came back, wasn't just straight away, okay. It was like, well, all right, but, tell me why. He'd be like, what do you mean tell you why? I'm telling you because I'm your boss. So, you know what I mean? It's a little bit different. So,
but I mean, you're coming back as Mark Bosnich International, who's got 2 League Cup medals in your back pocket.
Yeah.
You're not that kid,
but also you got to remember as well, I'm coming back to a manager who's just been knighted, and who just won the treble. So you can imagine the type of, had the type of power that he was feeling within himself as well, which is fine. But I was like, whatever. But any type of discrepancy or doubt that was put against him, from my perspective, about anything, not just about football, whatever, about anything, was sort of looked upon as like, sort of a little bit. I could tell from he changed. Put it that way. I think he was less understanding than he was way back when I was first a young kid. But then he'd probably turn around and say, well, I was completely different as well. So that's completely understandable. But in terms of a manager, I mean, he'll go down as one of the greatest managers of all time. There's no doubt about that. Phenomenal success ratio. Very, very good at spotting a player. Was ruthless when he needed to be. He knew his deficiencies, and he would cover them by hiring people to make sure that those deficiencies would be taken care of, and very, very good, you have to say, overall, at managing a squad of real winners, of big players. That's not easy at all, because when you got big players, 11 players will be happy on the weekend. The other 6 or 7 will not be for not playing, but you're going to need those other 6 or 7 if you're going to be truly successful, because the amount of games you're going to have. And I think the fact that he clapped on very, very quickly. And that was advice I think he'd got from the likes of Marcello Lippi and a few others, during the 90s, of, the fact that we played so many games in England. It was very, very difficult, for any top team to play one side in all 3 or 4 competitions. Yeah. And he clapped onto that. And he also realized as well, at that time, the spending power of the top clubs in Spain and Italy was still well above the spending power of the Premier League clubs, although that's changed, and it did start to change. But the fact that he could, like, for example, buying Dwight York, Andy Cole, and having Teddy Sheringham and Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, look how vital that proved in the end. Because without, sort of seeing that and having that vision to say, okay, well, maybe I can't have the very, very best at this moment in time. Maybe I can't have a Ronaldo, for example, the original Ronaldo. But what I'll do is I'll get 4 world-class strikers, and I'll keep them happy the way I'll manage them. And in the end, look what happened. It was Teddy Sheringham and Ole Gunnar Solskjaer who scored those 2 vital goals
Champions
that night
League,
in Barcelona in the Champions League. So you have to, like I said, for me, I think that was very adaptable. And for me, adaptability is a mark of a genius. There's no doubt about that. The other thing you have to say when you come down to the ruthlessness, you could tell that he had basically, if he didn't change the team, I think he realized that maybe he may get changed. So he very much adapted very, very well to each era. He realized a lot of times when players' time was going to be up, and he usually sort of moved them on before that. And you can see, had those, that obviously the treble winning team, the original team that first broke the duck and won, but the big aim was always Europe. And then he had that other team with, Carlos Tevez, Cristiano Ronaldo, Berbatov, Wayne Rooney. So he was very, very good at that. There's no doubt at rejuvenating that squad. And he did it, like I said, during good times, yes, in terms of the money he could spend, but also during times when money was a little bit, not as free flowing as it perhaps been in the past for him.
I mean, there's no doubting he's an absolute genius of a manager, and probably will go down as the greatest Premier League manager of all time. And you're right though. Thinking back, I mean, I obviously I'm a big Newcastle fan. That team, Newcastle obviously would have had Shearer and Ferdinand, but for example, Andy Cole was sold for Ferdinand to come in. That Man United team were the real, the original team to bring in 4 world-class strikers into the Premier League, and then rotation. But would you say that during the latter years, and when you were there, was he? I mean, players seem to be kind of gone without much of an argument. Like Beckham went, Roy Keane.
That's why I tried to sort of say in terms of him being ruthless and getting rid of players, just on the whim. And when you had started having that type of success that he did have, it was far easier for him to do that. But it must be said, whether or not he got, whoever it was he got rid of, whether it be Beckham or Jaap Stam, Roy Keane, whatever, pretty much you have to look then either the season after or the season after that, they've had success. So he could always go back to the board and say, well, look, however much time. But let's not forget as well the fact that the board originally, when I was there the first time, there were times, JP, and I remember this probably what was about 4 months before they won that first FA Cup, where the crowd basically, I'd say and they'd actually ironically played Crystal Palace that day and they'd lost. And he left Mark Hughes on the bench, and half a K-stand, which was in the far corner of the ground, so if the Stretford end was to your left, that was in the far corner where you could still stand up. Because he left Mark Hughes on the bench, they all sat down in protest, and he lost 2-1. And I reckon out of the 50,000 that were there that day or whatever it was, I reckon at least half the crowd stayed back and clawed for his head. There were people coming down the training ground. And the board, in my opinion, Martin Edwards and co, and Sir Bobby Charlton and Maurice Watkins and all that, deserve a lot of credit for standing by him, because the easiest thing at that time would have been to let him go. They stood by him. And whether or not it was a bit of a result of that or not, but then obviously when he had the success, but a lot of people like that too. When you have a great deal of success, sometimes you think that you've got that, which he did have at that time, that type of power. But to be fair to him, even after those departures, he eventually replaced somebody, or they eventually. And how do they do that? The best way was by winning. There's no doubt about that. Obviously towards the end, his greatest challenge, and one really that hasn't been met even after he's left, was Manchester City. And the fact that, during the time, when he's with the Glazers, he had to deal with the fact that obviously they couldn't be as free spending in the past because of the debt that they had to service each year. The fact that they did win, they still won titles when he got Van Persie and all that is a testament to his management. You have to say that, no doubt about that. Because Manchester City, as we've seen, both then and now, are not noisy neighbours. They are top neighbours, put it that way. They've built a house that's equivalent to Man United and gone above it too in terms of the success of the football club. There's no doubt about that. So far as Manchester City are concerned, the final bit on their cake will be to start dominating in Europe as well. And they've got a wonderful opportunity to do that this season.
Yeah, I think they will. To be honest, I picked them to win the league and to win the Champions League last season. They lost to Lyon, beating Dortmund and, getting into that semi-final. But I thought Paris Saint-Germain in the semi-final, that's where it's going to end. But, those 2 goals, I really think now they can they can push on. Roy Keane, what was he like to play with? And was he as ferocious as he's made out to be in the dressing room?
Oh, he could be if he wanted to, no doubt about that. But he was definitely not as ferocious. He said it was a time for him to relax. He would laugh, have a good time, just like everyone else. Wanted to be one of the boys like everyone else. But he would hold his corner. But you know what? Like I said to you, Irishmen are such a big part of my story in football. And the one thing that always, for me, what always stands out about any Irishman is that they will stand their corner, regardless of their stature or whatever. They will stand their corner, and we've seen that before. They are real warriors and fighters, and he was no different. Obviously, his roles would have changed in the club. You know, I mean, when he first came, I wasn't there, but he would have been sort of one of the younger ones in the dressing room there, and then he became more of a father figure by the time I'd come back with the young boys.
He was the captain then, right?
He was the captain. He was a domineering force. He was Fergie's man in the dressing room and on the park. There's no doubt about that. He's enforcer. And he could lose his temper, you know, when he wanted to. A lot of times it's much more, I think he does it more on purpose to get a reaction rather than it being absolutely serious. But he's also one of them that you could call at any time and he'd be around at your house to help you. There's no doubt about that. There was more of a soft side to him than anyone would know. And I think that's a little bit of perhaps, you know, a little bit of fear on his part that he doesn't want too many people to know that he has that soft side because of the fear of being taken advantage of. But he was as domineering as a personality in a dressing room that I've ever played with. There's no doubt about that. And from a playing perspective, a far better player than people gave him credit for. I think a lot of people, especially towards the end, more concentrated on the ferociousness and the poor tackles, but he was a tremendous player. Let's not forget, I mean, he was the hottest property in the whole of Britain when he was at Nottingham Forest. He could score goals. He could get up and down. He could score headed goals. You know, he could, if he wanted to, play at centre-back position. He was a phenomenal player. He slowed, when I say slowed down, he perhaps didn't get up and down as much as he used to post his knee injury, but he used his experience and he had young players around him. He adapted himself. But a phenomenal player, absolute phenomenal player. There's no doubt about that. A far better player than a lot of people gave him credit for.
From what I've heard, he's got a great sense of humor as well. But you know, I can imagine he wouldn't
you
hold back.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know about that.
He wouldn't hold back on giving, you know, a player a bollocking if they'd messed up.
Oh, anyone. Yeah. There's no doubt about that. But you accept it, especially like, you know, if, say someone like myself, you come from the outside and he's the captain of the team. Different these days, you know, talking to managers who used to be my teammates these days, they say you've got to be very, very careful with what you say to young players these days, because if you say the wrong thing, you can lose them. And if they're very influential in the dressing room, you know, 3 or 4 players could follow them. They put their headphones on like you've got, and they just go quiet, and you've lost them. And you know, as a manager, if you start to lose a dressing room, you're in big trouble. But back then, in that time, it was more seen as the fact that if somebody had to go at you, whether it be a senior player or the manager, it was seen as that they really cared about you, because that's why they were trying to get a reaction out of you. And also the biggest thing was, how were you going to react? So it was sort of like a real test of metal. But, you know, times change. There's no doubt about that.
Then you had a move to Chelsea. Tell us what happened there.
Yeah, I went to Chelsea. For me, it was fantastic being able to go to a club like Chelsea in London. London was a place out of all the other places that I've been to, Birmingham, Manchester so far, that was most like Sydney in terms of its multiculturalness, like you spoke about. And I thought, you know, as well, the fact that, you know, even though it was a manager who was new to the Premier League and Claudio Ranieri, lovely man, and I hadn't won the title, I think, since 1958. You know, and the way they were saying, so like, you know, we've got these plans and we want to do this and we want to do that. So I thought this was great. So I sort of tidied up business with Manchester United and said, I think this would be a really, really good idea. And you know, went to Chelsea. So it was funny. I was thinking the other day, the 11 games I actually had, which are like when I got into the team before I got injured and then run into trouble, it was probably the most consistent 11 games I've ever had before. But unfortunately got injured at Everton, and then Carlo Cudicini came in and done brilliantly, to be fair to him, and stayed in the side. But they didn't end up winning a trophy. And then Roman Abramovich came in. I missed out on the Roman Abramovich thing because of what happened off the pitch, excuse me, which was a crying shame. But, you know, a lot of people say, oh, the trouble you run into and all that, do you regret going there? And my answer is no, I don't, because that trouble that I run into and in the end had to deal with myself, which was something completely not to do with football. And I had to sink to sort of depths, if you like, and levels that I thought I would never have in me to actually go through and do, but I did. It's actually made me the man I am today, really. So I don't have a regret. It's unfortunate because and I had to really pretty much stop my playing career. But every now and then I believe in life, you come up against a test like that. And look, if I'd failed that in the end, what was going on, I wouldn't be here talking to you today.
No, I mean, we're all humans. And I spoke to a footballer, a few months ago, had to retire early because of his heart. And, he said, what people don't realize is that you're also a footballer. They see you on TV, you're a footballer, and their impression is that you're paid millions and that your life is amazing. But you also have to remember that you're a human being. You're still a human being, and you're not just a footballer. You've got your own life, you got your relationship, your family, your health, everything else, your mental health, everything else to go with it too. So the tabloids as well are very quick to jump on that kind of stuff. Once you make a mistake, straight away.
Yeah,
so
understandable too. Understandable, but he is right in a way. You do get paid millions. It is a great life.
I love the honesty, Mark. I love the honesty. Right, and then you took a break from the game after that for a while.
Yeah, well, pretty much so, because I had to deal with all those issues, which is basically it's another hour telling you about it. But anyway, I got on top of everything, completely everything, because it wasn't just the issues that people had read about or think about. It was outside forces that I had to take care of, and then all of a sudden, two people from Australia came down. The Aussie team was playing in London, and they said, "Would you come down and see us?" I said, "Okay, no worries." And went down to see them. I said, Aussie soccer's going really well. Would you consider coming back? And I said, are you sure? I said, yeah, I've got more luggage than the Queen. Are you sure you want me back now when things are going so well? And I said, no, we think it'd be great for you to come back and whatever. And I said, all right. So I went down. There was at that time, Australia had bid for the 2022 World Cup, which obviously went to Qatar. So they had a big FIFA conference down there. So I went down there and saw some old faces and this, that, and the other. Then went back to England. I said, I'll come and play some games. I hadn't played for about 6 years. So I played some games for the local team. Everything went fine. And then, funny enough, I was going to go to a reality TV program in America. It was like, I think myself, I think Brigitte Nielsen, the lady who played there in Rocky IV. And I think
I think she was in Beverly Hills Cop as well, yeah.
Yeah. And I'd actually taken like half the money that they were offering. And I was going to go back. My parents were like, listen, we don't really want to be having to, read about this or see this on TV. Please stay here. Please stay in Australia. This is 2000. I said, listen, I've given my word. I've taken half the money. I've got to go, right? And anyway, I had to go to the dentist who was my cousin, yeah? Anyway, so my cousins turned around and said, I had to go to him about 3 days before I left. And my cousins turned around and said, you can't travel. I said, what do you mean you can't? I can't travel. He goes, you got an abscess. He goes, if you travel, you could die. I went, well, okay. I said, well, put that in writing. I'm going to have to send that to the producers and this, that, and the other. So I did. I had to pay the money back. Mum and dad were all happy. Anyway, I went back to my cousin about 2 weeks later. Well, a week later, because he said it's an abscess. He went, you're not going to believe this. It's gone. So I said, Mum and Dad and him probably fixed it up. When it's gone, he goes, yeah, gone completely. And he goes, yeah, it's a miracle. I've never seen this before in dental history. I said, thanks, buddy. So anyway, and also the company I was working for, Fox Sports, they had the local league, but also more importantly to me, they had the Premier League. So I was able to work on the Premier League. They had it up until about 4 or 5 years ago. So that was absolutely outstanding and forged my new career basically on TV. Like I said to you before, met a smashing young girl down here. I've got 2 fabulous kids. So and go back every year. Well, pre the pandemic. Go back every year. I go 2 weeks to London and 2 weeks to Croatia. So really, I'm really lucky, to be honest. Really lucky.
Where do you go? Where do you go in Croatia?
Well, my father's from the Dalmatian coast, so we usually go to Split. So that's there on the coast. He's
Beautiful,
from an island called he's from an island called Korčula. So we go to visit the family on the island because that's like about a 3-hour boat ride from Split. But then my fiance and the 2 kids, we usually stay in Split on the coast, and then we go to London for a couple of weeks. So, but that was all pre-pandemic when everything got thrown in the air, so to speak.
Yeah, we got into a place called Kirk and Bashka, which is about a 5-hour drive from here. Unbelievable. So the water's beautiful, the food's amazing, people are super friendly. London, no thanks. Too big, too smoggy. So when you're back to Australia, you actually played for the Central Coast Mariners.
Yes.
And of course, on your debut, once again, Mark Bosnich saves a penalty.
Yeah, against Sydney, against my
Sydney.
hometown. That was funny. It was only a pre-season tournament, but it was so funny because being my hometown crowd, there was about 12, 13,000 people there. It's preseason friendly. They're like, wow. It's like, that was a massive crowd for a preseason friendly. And the Sydney supporters were giving me stick throughout the whole game. And they were on my right-hand side here in the second half, literally, just over the sideline, yeah. And, of course, they got the penalty, and they were cheering. I was thinking to myself, oh, God. Anyway, I saved the penalty. And then straight after, the manager of Central Coast, was about 80th minute, he took me off. So those times, you had to walk towards the halfway. You don't have to change the rule now. You can just walk off, wherever the nearest exit is. So I walked past those Sydney supporters and basically sort of bowed to them like that. But it was really funny. It was really funny. It was really good, especially the fact that I hadn't played for 6 years. I was somebody was looking after me from upstairs.
Now, tell me about playing for Oz. I know you actually scored for your country. I remember I did. Yeah. Those it was early morning, like time back in Ireland, and you used to always see Australia and Uruguay, in a playoff for the World Cup. Did you play in those games?
And eventually they beat Uruguay. They got knocked out a couple of times. Look, me in Australia, it was very, very difficult. Like I said to you at the start of the program, there was no international sort of breaks during that time. So there was always a massive, massive issue with the club that I was at, that I had to go all that way back to Australia and play. Hence why I didn't go back to play very, very much. You're always proud to play for your country. There's no doubts about that. But the bottom line is, and you talk about it honestly before, it was never a major priority of mine. My main priority was to play for my club sides. I'd never used Australia, as a lot of other players have done, as a advertisement to make that move, which is, I've got no problem with it, but I left on my own at 16. I didn't do that, So Australia and me was never a match made in heaven, so to speak. We come very close to qualifying in 1997 when we got knocked out in away goals by Iran. And like I said, it was always like, you couldn't win, put it that way, because if you went to Australia, the club managers would always get really upset. If you got injured, God forbid. I got injured once when I was at Man United. Fergie wouldn't talk to me for a couple of weeks. If I didn't go back, I would get a lot of stick in the papers here in Australia as well. And it came to a head at the start of the 93-94 season, like I said, when we had Canada in the second round of playoffs, and there's the opening day of the Premier League, which would happen now, but eventually, like I said, they did qualify in 2005. They had a good World Cup 2006. They haven't been past the first round since, but Australia, you have to say, say Republic of Ireland glory days. There's sort of no disrespect to Australia, but they're a poor man's Republic of Ireland. So they've done fabulous in 2006. There's no doubt about that. And it's really good for the football here in the country when they do qualify. It's just that they haven't gone past the first round for quite some time. But getting into Asia has made it much easier, because in the past, although the first part of the qualifiers were easy in Oceania, we'd always get maybe like the 4th or 5th place qualifier from South America or something like that.
Never going to be easy.
That's why you had the Uruguay game, which eventually, like I said, they conquered. They won on penalties in 2005 to qualify. The 4 years earlier, they got defeated by Uruguay. We got defeated by Iran 4 years earlier. 4 years earlier, it was Argentina, Diego Maradona's Argentina, rest in peace. So it was always a very, very difficult path. But the fact that we got into Asia, and that was down to Sir Frank Lowy, who was, who sort of restarted Australian football after it had a bit of a lull in the early 2000s, was absolutely fantastic. So now, coming from Asia, where Asian teams are getting better and better, by the way, it's getting more and more difficult. The last 2 times have been really, last time we had to go through a playoff, we had to go first through Syria, then Honduras, or the other way around, whichever way it was, to get to Russia. And the time before, it went down to the last game. So it's getting harder and harder, but still it's a league format. It's not a one-off game. And it's still, for me, a much better chance, and it's better for the country that they are in Asia.
Even though it's, the 4th or 5th sport in Australia, you've always produced some fantastic players. I mean, like yourself, Harry Kewell, Mark Viduka, I think Scott McDonald up at Celtic, banging in the goals. You've always produced some fantastic players. Just something you touched on there, though. You said you were injured and Fergie wouldn't talk to you for weeks. Would he do that with every player, or was it just you?
Oh, no, I think he's done even worse. I mean, speak to the likes of Neil Webb and people like that who was one of his favourites. Then he went to an England trip and got injured and sort of fell out completely with him. So he was just basically one of them. You can ask any of the players who were there. Ryan Giggs had the same situation with Wales. Very, very rarely he was like, you're not going, simple as that. which you can understand. Now, his priority was Manchester United. So especially when you had some of these matches were just friendlies, or you know what I mean. Thankfully now there's a lot of cohesion and harmony with the international calendar, because international football is important. There's no doubt about that. But that was a time when it was a little bit more Wild West, so to speak. And like I said to you, so far as I was concerned, my number one priority was my club, my employers. So, you know, and it was, I used to try to explain it to people over here. I could never really quite see that, but it's difficult because this is my living. This is what I do, you know, and I'm scared to lose my place or to go back and to turn around and them say, look, see you later. If you want to go play for Australia all the time, we'll get somebody else.
At the clubs you were at, was there always clashes between international managers with players and club managers?
Yeah, with the clubs I was at, yes. Yeah, no doubt about that. And whether it be direct or not, with an assistant or just in the way that they spoke to you, and then they know they could put you in a certain type of mood, always. Because you got to remember as well, this is not like me going to Dublin to play for Republic of Ireland on the weekend, which is there's like an hour away from London or even less from Manchester or Birmingham. This is like going on a 24-hour round trip. You know, that takes some out of you. It really does take some out of you. It's a completely different scenario, regardless of that you travel first class or whatever. You ask anyone who makes that trip to Australia and then comes back, it kind of, you know, for 2 or 3 weeks after, you still feel a little bit, well, you know, really a little bit funny. And I remember once, like I said to you, at Manchester United, and I went back because it was a really special game for some type of thing, but it was against the Brazil under-23s, and then something went wrong, and Ronaldo, who was, you know, the original Ronaldo, was playing, pulled out, and I came back, and because of the long flight, I came back and my knee blew up, and I missed the game against Derby. He was livid, and I can understand it.
Yeah, I'm just touching on that. I was 22 at the World Cup, Japan and Korea in 2002, and you know, I was really excited about it because that Ireland team had done so well. You know, they'd knocked out Holland, they drew Portugal, and they got there, and then there was the fallout with Roy Keane and Mick McCarthy, and you know, the Irish national television actually issued a plea for Roy Keane to stay, but I think it was Alex Ferguson who sent the jet over to bring him back. But I was thinking, of course he's going to do that, you know, because he won't get injured and he's ready for the next season then, you know.
100%, 100%. I'll never forget that. You know, you spoke about that season with Aston Villa, that fantastic season we had, and we played Leeds on the Sunday, Wembley, and we all had, including myself, all had to go off to internationals, you know, and all of a sudden, and we've got that following Sunday, you know, we're playing Liverpool in the FA Cup semi-final. And these internationals, well, for mine one was, I don't know about the other ones, were friendlies. Oh. And I used to think to myself, this is ridiculous. You know, we're playing, okay, we played Scotland, fair enough, up at Hampden, but still, you know, you could really have done with that week off. And this is why I think that they're looking so hard at maybe, you know, just having an international month, so to speak, so you can get the games over and done with, because it's just becoming too much for players. And the bottom line is you want your best players on the park. And that means any type of organisation, any type of thing. So if you're going to a World Cup and your players are not only fully fit, but fresh, you know, all of a sudden, you know, TV rights, as we know, are so important worldwide. But all of a sudden, you know, TV companies are going to say, well, really, are we going to pay the type of money we want to pay for a World Cup when we're going to have players in that type of state? Same thing the other way around, whether it be for club competitions or whatever. And this is where they've got to come up with a formula where players aren't playing too much. Now, a lot of people tell us, oh, you're getting paid. Okay, whatever. Okay, but the bottom line is, it doesn't matter, like you said before, how much you're getting paid. You're still human in terms of the fact that, you know, you need your rest. You need to, you know, there's only a certain amount of games you can play. And coming back to, like I said to you about Fergie, sort of working it out, you know, after being told by quite a few European managers you play too many games, you've got to make sure that, you know, because big stars, they don't come along. You don't have Cristiano Ronaldo, Lionel Messi coming along every 5 years. They come along every 30 or 40 years. So I think that's an important thing. And the last thing you want, for me, football is about the players and fans. Yeah, specific and World Cups and big tournaments specifically for me about the fans. And the last thing you want is fans sort of going to a tournament and say, oh, God, I was really disappointed. But bottom line was, you know, the majority of your team played 60 games that year. Half of them weren't even fully fit. You don't want that. You don't want that scenario. And it can be done. There's no doubt, in my opinion, it can be done. Yeah,
in your opinion, should we scrap the friendlies? I mean, it's a great way for international teams to bring in play. But this Nations League in Europe now, I think it's ridiculous.
The Nations League has been an attempt by UEFA to make to put a little bit more importance on these so-called friendlies. Okay, but number one, I don't understand it, and for me, one thing I love about football is the simplicity. It's so difficult to understand. And number two, I haven't really seen a major difference between those games and what the friendlies used to be in the past. And that's what I would turn around and say, why don't you scrap that? Yeah, have your normal qualifiers like you have. Let teams play at the end of the year, okay, or a certain period throughout the year where you think is the best. And then especially, I would say from March to the end of the season, I would have no international games. That's really where the business end of the season is. Yeah, and I think that's a really important thing, because it's the last thing you want as a club manager if you're going for a title and a Champions League and a cup, and all of a sudden you have to let your player go. And people say, well, when are we going to get this? You can get them in at a different stage. There's no doubt about that. World Cup, European qualifiers, you could probably argue, no doubt about that, a little bit different. But, try telling that to a club manager, especially a club manager that's maybe an underdog, that's sort of, taking a team from nowhere and is relying on a smaller squad, and he lets his player go, and they're in the semi-final, say, of the European Cup. They're in the semi-final, they're second in the league with a game in hand, and they're in the final, say, of the League Cup, and one of his best players get injured on international duty before a crucial game. He'll be livid, and understandably so. Huh?
Yeah, no, I can totally understand that. Mark, who's the best player you've played with and the best you've played against?
Yeah, against, I'd have to say the late Diego Maradona, no doubt about that. But there were some others as well. Gabriel Batistuta, Robbie Fowler at his peak. Robbie Fowler at his peak was so good. I don't think people realise how good he actually was. Some fantastic players, absolutely fantastic players. I could go on and on and on, but those three, in terms of being strikers, really come to mind very, very quickly. Alan Shearer at his peak was fantastic. There's so many. Ruud Gullit. The list pretty much goes on. There's no doubt about that. In terms of playing with Ryan Giggs, there's no doubt about that. So far as I'm concerned, because I saw him as a young kid and he was absolutely phenomenal. Paul McGrath mentioned, Gianfranco Zola, absolute phenomenal player. Dwight York, all these type of players. With Marcel Desailly, Emmanuel Petit, excellent player as well. But if I had to go for three, like I said, that I played with, I would go Ryan Giggs number one, Gianfranco Zola 2, Paul McGrath and Dwight York equal third. No doubt about that.
Some players, Giggs, he's going through a bit of trouble now, but he was some player. Wow. I mean, a lot of the English weren't happy that he never, played for England, but the Wales were kind of limited with what they had. But, what he did for Manchester United, that goal against Arsenal in the FA Cup, when he ran the length of the field, phenomenal. Yeah. Mark, what are you doing these days?
Well, like I said, I'm still working for Fox Sports. So they've got me doing, at this moment in time, they've got me doing presenting as well. So I'm actually presenting. So there you go. So, which is completely different, analysing, presenting and co-commentating and talking about other sports as well. I don't know why, but they have, because I've always got this thing in football. I say to people, well, how much football experience have you got? Especially over here, it's not the number one sport. So of course, that's like blowback. So if I'm talking about another sport or one of these sporting programs, I go, Mark, don't you always say to people how much football experience? Well, how much rugby league experience you got? I go, well, none really, but you asked my opinion. That's what I've been doing. I've been very, very lucky to be able to talk about something I love. I'm very, very fortunate.
You're clearly a very good speaker. You got a good sense of humor, and you've clearly got an amazing knowledge of the game. So when you went into the TV work, did you fit in quite easily?
Originally, yes, but originally I was just doing the analysis bit. So I found the analysis bit, it's just like basically you just saying to me, Boz, what did you make of the first half? That's it. And I would say, well, okay, this and that and the other. And I always had a good understanding, a good football intelligence. And I was very fortunate, like I said, that the likes of Ray Houghton, when I was growing, Brian Robson, that was another one that was another fantastic. I mean, he was up there. I should have put him in that list as well. That I've got great players that I played with. He's definitely up on that list. People like that to listen to, learn off. Fergie, Ron Atkinson, former Andy Townsend. These were, fantastic players to learn. And then the foreign influence at Chelsea, you spoke to people, even like some people like Bolo Zenden who played at Barcelona. You heard stories and this, that, and the other. It was very, very fortunate to have those type of people. So I always had good football intelligence. And being a goalkeeper, you can see the whole pitch and you know exactly what can trouble you, and you know from that then what could trouble the opposition. And you just develop that, develop that from watching and watching and watching and watching and watching. And also by talking to people, I try to talk to as many people as I possibly can. And when I say that, say the local league, I'll talk to those young players. I'll ask them things because you don't never stop learning, and football has changed so much. We've had the Pep Guardiola influence that, you could say, which is Cruyff Part 2 with Barcelona and how that's evolved as well, and how people have come with counter things for that, to try to counter that. And then you had the adaptation of Guardiola teams from Bayern Munich to Manchester City, and how they maybe just adapt to and cut their cloth accordingly. Football's great like that. It goes in circles. And things may come back to something similar before, but it always keeps going like that. But, some of the genuine principles and all that of our game going back over 100 years, and the fabric within all of us. And that's why I think it really shook all of us to the core when we heard about the Super League being announced, because all of us start as and will finish as football supporters. And there are some principles that, regardless of how things adapt and change, that remain very sacred to us all. And one of them is the fact that no matter who you are or where you are, that if you do well, that you can be rewarded for your success. And if you don't, there will be consequences. And I think that was the main reason why it caused such a backlash, because of that notion of no matter how you do, whether you win, lose, or draw. And I think Pep Guardiola summed it up so succinctly that, you can't have a situation where it doesn't matter if you win or lose. And I embraced that. I embraced the football supporters, and I asked their opinion as well. I think that's important. Yes, you're always going to form your own opinion, but in our game, I think the beauty of it is everybody's entitled to opinion. And even though some may have more authority on it because they've played at a higher level, doesn't exactly make them right. And I think that's the beauty of our game.
Yeah, brilliant stuff. And I think, the falling apart of the European Super League was a win for world football. It certainly was.
Yeah.
Right, Mark, this has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on. You've had a fantastic career, and I wish you all the best for the future. Mark Bosnich, thank you very much.
Thank you, JP. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening. If you'd like to hear more of our podcasts, please click on the red subscribe button on the bottom right-hand side. Thank you.